Welcome back to my channel, Star Booze.
The funniest woman in America just delivered a career performance. Though the audience in the studio sat in startled silence, the team was trying not to cry. It would be referred to as television gold by critics. There would be awards, however. Carol Burnett went off the platform with a pledge to herself. She would never see that episode. Never ever. Regarding for 7, she has fulfilled that promise for years. The woman whose job was based on creating people laugh because they can't stand it herself. In the single instance when she informed the absolute reality, no humor or jokes, voice is simply heartbreaking truth. That slash is so deep that everything's share present. What transpired during those brief moments in that tormented America's beloved in 1977 for the remainder of her days. Furthermore, why would someone who turned anguish into a reality for Decadacinto, giggling and ultimately produce something too genuine to confront? The solution can be found in occulthood that would have caused the masked individuals before they were even able to dream. A 2-year-old girl in San Francisco sits by a window waiting for footsteps in Antonio. Things could promote love rather than chaos. However, the footsteps that follow are those off in their own house. Strangers, parents so ingested alcohol that they have forgetting that their daughter is in need. Often the tale of Carol Burnett doesn't start by giggling, it starts with quiet. The sort of deafening silence that fills a home where grown-ups have slept. During bedtime tales in which a youngster discovers that being invisible is the safest way to live. Sometimes, her dad occasionally worked at a movie theater, his hands trembling excessively to maintain a stable job. Her mum lived in a fog of unfulfilled promises and bitter dreams, lacking any emotional connection at all when in the flesh. Both would ultimately pass away due to their addictions, leaving an abandoned legacy in their wake. Carol would be haunted by that for decades. However, this is what makes humans so amazing. Spirit. Even in the most dire conditions, it finds a way to live. When Carol was a little child, she had already found something patented. Amusing others, even for a brief moment, may turn suffering into something tolerable. When her parents ultimately abandoned all pretense of Carol, a mom, found solace in an unexpected location. Mabel, her grandma White, rescued her from the turmoil, brought her to Hollywood from Texas. However, no red carpet was waiting for them. Rather, they discovered themselves in one small room in a dilapidated boarding home encircled by people's forgotten people. They made it on $20 a day week. They were unable to purchase toiletries, paper, and they stealthily removed it from restrooms in movie theaters. Not quite out of sheer despair, but greed. However, something is inside those deteriorating walls. Something magical occurred. Carol found out what would develop into her most valuable skill and her greatest hardship, the capacity to produce happiness in the face of pain. She created Karen, a twin sister. Carol wasn't anything compared to Karen. Self-assured, attractive, and always joyful. Carol brought Karen to life so vividly that even the adults around them who were desperate thought she was real. She would dash up the flames, flee, change her hair and clothing, and then come back as Karen. Charming and amusing, this wasn't a simple game. Carol took her first masterclass in pitfalls in realizing that people occasionally require you to be someone otherwise in order to forget their own suffering. For some time, however, Carol's most notable escapade each Saturday when she and her grandma would use 50-cent Tomovi passes, over 10% of their weekly earnings. For the select few in the dark 4 hours, Carol could forget about shouting and peeling paint. Voices, stars and life shone on screen. People kissed, danced, and it was all in one. Carol heard about those dim theaters, something that would alter her life forever. The renowned work of Johnny Weissmuller through echoed with Tarzan's roar, and it struck Carol like a bolt of lightning. She went home and started imitating that sound, honing each note and beat. She was unaware that she was in training. Building the type of breath in her voice control that most vocalists need years to master. It was only a game to her. However, that shout would eventually bring down audiences in giggling and cheering. What started as a child's frantic mimicry among the first instruments in her comedy toolbox. When she was 7 years old, Carol Burnett was years old when she discovered their most significant life lesson. Laughter served as a barrier against the world, resolved to crush her soul. However, she didn't understand that one day the same shield would get too bulky to handle. There would be various ways to test that shield. Carol was too little to imagine. As elevated as the time for school graduation drew near, Carol had one desire that seemed unattainable and inevitable: journalism. Her mom had always desired to pursue a career in writing, and Carol felt compelled to complete what her mother. The objective was UCLA, but when it came time to enroll, she encountered a harsh actuality. She lacked the required $50 for the cost of tuition. For the majority of individuals, it would have signified the dream's demise. Additionally, for a time, it appeared to be. Next, a remarkable event occurred. An unknown person whose identity Carol never discovered came forward and made the payment. Precisely how much she required. No obligations connect, no justification was provided, only enough cash to permanently alter her life. Carol intended to study at UCLA. Journalism. But destiny had different ideas. She was flipped by one elective theater class. The entire universe inverted. Within that classroom, something clicked within of her. She was no longer bashful, impoverished, or unseen. She was boisterous, humorous, and totally living. The danger of changing one's major paid off in a hurry. At the conclusion of her first year, she was named most promising for the year. New to the theater department at UCLA. It was not merely a title. It was approval for which she wasn't crazy pursuing this unattainable goal. However, Carol's greatest revelation occurred in the most in an unexpected manner. Serving as an usherette for 65 cents an hour, she discovered stuffing during a San Diego party, puts items in her purse to take home. To her granny. At that point, a well-dressed stranger came up to her. He wasn't a performer. He was a La Jolla-based millionaire shipbuilder. Carol told him that she had a dream about going. He traveled to New York in order to appear on Broadway. Offered her something that seemed too wonderful to be true, to be accurate. $1,000 for her and her Don Soyen, my boyfriend, however with 3 regulations. Don't give his name away. Use only funds to travel to New York. Additionally, if they have to assist others in order to succeed. The same. He didn't desire recognition or acknowledgement. He merely stated that someone hadn't gave him assistance, and he was repaying it ahead with $2,000. Carol and Don packed her bags and departed UCLA. They went to the east. Although Carol had Texas as the only place she has ever traveled, had no acquaintances in New York, yet shouldn't give a damn. Later on, she stated that shouldn't have enough knowledge to be afraid. The money began to dreadfully vanish. Quick. Carol once started crying, weeping when we placed a collect call to her relatives, who pleaded with her to return house. Then, as she was ready to, she heard a radio broadcast to give up. That would make all the difference. Carol, the hurricane was ascending. Coast. She interpreted it as a sign, and in some way it enabled her to persevere and stand up for her aspirations. She quickly discovered that the rehearsal club, an elderly young women's boarding home attempting to enter the realm of the arts. At $18 per week, Carol was given a cot in a room with 4 additional actresses. There was just one closet and a bathroom. But to her it was heaven. Her first significant break came from anything wholly absurd. John Foster Dulles' love song, Fine Flexible, extremely serious U.S. Secretary of State. It was an outrageous joke tune. And ridiculous, but Carol did it so flawlessly that it became her signature fragment. The crowds went crazy. She received an invite to appear on the Jack P. Show, followed by the Ed Sullivan program. She went outside, onto her knees on the Sullivan stage, uttering. However, by the time her set ended, people were laughing and howling. And precisely 5 years after obtaining that, Don and Carol paid back the enigmatic loan, returned the entire tours, and the millionaire Enver replied, remaining anonymous to the very end. However, Carol's achievement was only getting started. She was the basis. Constructing, transforming suffering into output, soon turned weakness into strength, making her one of the most well-known figures in history of television. What she was unaware of was that this identical present would eventually make her face a reality as well. Agonizing to endure. Achievement in the show. There is a way for company to accelerate more than anyone could have imagined. Additionally, for that, with acceleration, Carol reached its peak during the Carol Burnett Show. Performance first appeared. The history of television was created that evening. For 11 consecutive seasons, 30 millions of people crowded around their weekly television sets to watch Carol perform's magic with her cast. This wasn't limited to high ratings. This was a cultural occurrence. However, this is what made it genuinely revolutionary. Carol, the first woman to host her, was Burnett's own variety show during prime time in an male-dominated industry. She didn't simply smash the glass ceiling. She broke it all apart. This implied that each performance it was new and completely electrified, though the most well-known instance occurred during what's presently referred to as the elephant tale. In a drawing from their recurrent family series, Conway began a lengthy, absurd story about an elephant in a circus as he continued to babble. Vicky, Carol, and Harvey made a valiant effort to remain in character, but the narrative continued too stranger and funnier. By the end, even Vicki Lawrence went totally crazy. She turned with a line so surprising that everyone on set laughed at it, including Conway himself. Such moments turned into the show's heart, unadulterated, authentic, and entirely unscripted. The accolades came in. Throughout its run, it won 25 Emmy Awards. Carol Shea won several Golden Globes. Not only was the show entertaining, it affected all that followed. After O's Saturday Night Live, enormous debt to Carol's foundation paved the way for sketch comedy. However, the most memorable recurring portion in the show was also the family's most complicated Tedroffs. Carol's character was Eunice Higgins, a lady who was burdened with disappointment and dashed hopes, typically theatrics that combined dysfunction and humor, laughs sharply enough to maintain intriguing things. Eunice was angry, irritated, and constantly feeling like she was no longer alive. The persona was amusing, but there was more profound hiding behind the surface, a melancholy Carol could relate to too well. For many years, these drawings walked the tightrope between drama and comedy, exactly while audiences chuckled. They for Thormal acknowledged something genuine in Eunice's difficulties. The persona struck a chord since she stood for all those who have ever been stuck, or has anyone ever questioned whether their dreams were just silly dreams. However, as the show celebrated its 10th anniversary, Carol and the authors made the decision to push that limit farther than they had ever traveled. They created a drawing that would evaluate the absolute boundaries of what humor could be, what TV was capable of, and what Carol herself could take it. They didn't have a notion that they were going to produce anything so strong, so destructive that it would follow Carol around for the rest of her life. The performance that would result in she made a self-promise not to watch it was only a few weeks away. What takes place when someone who has constructed their whole work on turning suffering into what laughing also experiences pain. Deep to change. Carol Burnett ways about to learn in the most noticeable manner feasible. The authors had composed Aeon like any other family sketch they have created previously. The Gong Show was the name of it, and it would pressure Carol and Eunice Higgins oneself into a realm they would never investigated. Eunice enters the sketch.a talent competition with affordable rent. Persuaded thought singing on TV will at last bring her notoriety and recognition she has always been coveted. It is a configuration that might have taken a dozen other routes. Humorous instructions. However, the authors created a decision that would alter the entire situation. No humor, no humorous accent, no disproportionate motions, only a female, foolish and desperate, thinking that this one instance could ultimately validate a whole life. Carol had constructed her work on discovering the lightness within darkness, on turning suffering comically. This time, however, there would be no change. The pain this time would only cause suffering. While the cameras, Carol rolled and stepped upon that phony stage as Eunice in a talent show, and something changed. The crowd in the studio, anticipating laughter, they discovered observing something quite different. This was no joke, it was surgery. Carried, conducted without anesthesia, ad-lib in front of millions. Eunice performed alongside. Her voice was filled with frantic hope, pouring her heart into a show that she genuinely thought would transform her life. Then the judge's remark followed, with Relan Luton, host of the live game show. They didn't merely criticize her, they demolished her. They made fun of her tone, her look, her aspirations. They chuckled at her, the manner in which the world had always mocked those such as Eunice. The every tiny expression was captured by the camera. Carol's face, her hope is waning. Eyes, the knowledge that she is deceiving herself. The crushing force of a lifetime of disappointment shattering her spirit. Then everyone in the room was taken aback by dimmed. The lights in the studio, the camera slow withdrew while Eunice sat by herself. On the stage, she was crying uncontrollably. Face. No jokes, no music, no help. Simply a broken woman and her voice on tears. The audience in the studio didn't understand how to respond. They would arrive Portugals, but instead saw something had the feel of a documentary rather than a satirical sketch. The crew was in a state of shock, quiet. Many were stifling their tears. Independently, however, Carol was the one who was most impacted. When the camera she ceased rolling and left that stage and committed herself to the idea that for 47 years she has been preserved. She would never take in that performance. Never, ever never. She would explain why years later the agony was too genuine. She said. The destruction felt like Eunice's own because it was. In many respects, Carol had raised in poverty and had aspirations that, a period impractical, had been ridiculed, and as she was familiar with the sensation of wish for something so fervently that for the sake of a chance, you would risk all. She recognized the crushing weight of hearing the words, "You're not acceptable, not talented enough, but gorgeous enough." There was more than just Eunice in that sketch. Breaking, it was evident at every turn. Carol had been broken before, completed in a heartbreaking 7-minute show, something that would be praised as brilliant. All of the critics agreed in their commendation. There were awards. The other show was titled Groundbreaking. Groundbreaking, the ideal balance of drama that demonstrated that television could be creative. However, Carol wasn't able to observe any of that. She could only see her own suffering. Reflected in great definition back at her, transmitted to millions of individuals who were unaware that they were observing someone's real-life heartache on TV. Regarding 47 years, that incident has been present in allocation. Carol declines to go to his present, eagerly awaiting her, although she has never been able to deal with it. The lady who spent her transforming suffering into laughter over the course of a career ultimately produced something that was too real, too varnished, too real to watch. And perhaps that is the most potent example. To her creative abilities. Occasionally, the best we are broken by our performances in the process. The irony was not overlooked. Anyone familiar with Carol's story? This was an individual who had endured being abandoned, destitution and heartbreak and disappointment, who has transformed each heartache into a joke, and each failure becomes errant, but she was unable to confront 7 minutes of her own reality being recorded on movie. Yet even as she steered clear of that one performance, life continued to challenge her. Hercules' daughter would struggle with addiction beginning at the age of 13, Carol would observe her child's difficulties with demons that resemble the ones that ruined her own parents. Carol struggled with the same resolve for care as she has contributed to her profession. She made use of her philosophy, which you occasionally possess, to love someone so much that you allow them to tire. After a while, Carrie cleaned up and Carol and I grew closer than before. They collaborated to organize a Broadway based on Carol's early years, dubbed Hollywood Arms. However, tragedy struck once more. When Carrie passed away at the age of 38 from pneumonia brought on by lung cancer, Carol was heartbroken, yet she completed the play nonetheless. She had a duty to carry. Stated. The trend persisted after Carol Saran, her youngest daughter, slipped into her personal struggle with addiction. Carol was 87 years old, stepped up once again and took her under arrest. Dylan, a grandchild, the female who had life unwanted, had begun as the 3 generations of anchors. 91 Carol Burnett is still going strong at the age of labor to entertain, to make others laugh. In recent years she has had appearances on Better Call Palm Royale and Soul, to demonstrate that age does not lessen skill. However, despite 7 decades of that episode's performance behind her stays untouchable. It is situated in archives as if they were a part of her soul, gave away and will never be able to recover after one airing. The episode was altered television indefinitely. It demonstrated humor. Shows were able to manage tremendous weight, which viewers were hankering after something actual. It made room for performances that would in some ways combine sadness with humor. Before Carol, that seemed impossible, shown that it was possible. However, the human cost was high. Over the years in interviews, Carol has explained the sketch as needed, but she is happy that they did it, claims that because it was honest and significant. However, she discovered the truth occasionally has a cost that is too high to 2 payments throughout everything. That Carol performance is still the only thing that is true. Cannot face. She has overcome obstacles. Globally, won all of the prizes. Their aims to triumph and impact millions of lives with her present. However, that 7-minute sketch exists somewhere she just can't go. That might be okay. Perhaps some artwork is to be too strong for its maker. To endure. Perhaps the fact that Carol is unable to watch it to see how authentic it was. The show that was broadcast 47 years ago still has an impact on drama and comedy.